Hello, everyone. My name is Patricia Gagnon, and I am one of the co-founders of Intellispark. I am joining you today from sunny Arlington, Virginia, and very excited to have you here. Intellispark reaches more than 100,000 students in over 400 schools and for over 40 states in the US. And our platform helps schools to know the name, face, and story of children so that educators can better meet the needs of those students. I was a Latin and English teacher throughout the 90s in Rhode Island public schools, and I certainly knew it was important to develop strong relationships with my students. And I'm confident that my knowledge of them helps them to be more successful. But I don't think I quite appreciated at the time that gaps in their resiliency in areas such as confidence and stress and connectedness were actually predictive of their long-term success, academically and otherwise. And I also don't think I realized that there were strategies that I actually could have taken at that time, very proven strategies that could have moved the needle for them. Looking back, I also wish that I had been able to share what I knew with students more easily with my colleagues, and that I could have known what was working for them as they supported students. But I worked in a high school, and teamwork wasn't really easy to achieve, and even if it was the dream. So I appreciate the challenges that you face as educators, and my hope is that our work at Intellispark will help you all to be on the same page with deep insights about what your students need, what has been in place to support them, and what proven strategies you can take to help address their needs. Today's webinar on teaching resiliency is a topic that is central to what we do at Intellispark. Resiliency is at the heart of our ScholarCentric program, which is an evidence-based program helping to improve student outcomes by measuring and teaching resiliency. We know that you as educators are already doing amazing work to help your students be successful. But today we want to share additional practical strategies that you can use to incorporate resiliency into your teaching strategies and counseling practices, leading to better outcomes for your students. So I'm very pleased today to welcome Boston University professor Dr. Scott Solberg, who is a key advisor to our Intellispark team, and whose research on resiliency has really informed that resiliency is one of the key aspects to student success and can lead to determine academic success or failure. Scott is a professor in the Department of Counseling and Applied Human Development at Boston University's Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. He works across the country and internationally on the design, implementation, and evaluation of effective career development programs and services, demonstrating that and especially for high-need youth populations. Some of you may know Dr. Solberg for his recent book, Making School Relevant, with individualized learning plans, helping students create their own career and life goals, published by Harvard Education Press. It's a terrific book and an easy read. Thank you, Dr. Solberg. So the format of today's discussion is a discussion between Dr. Solberg and me. Over the course of the hour, I'll be asking Scott some questions. And while we can't hear or see you, we do encourage you to engage through the chat and the Q&A so we can do our best to address the topics you find helpful. One of my colleagues will be monitoring the chat. And I also want to point out that during the presentation, I will be putting some links in the chat that Dr. Solberg has provided that might be great resources for you. So you may want to have a page open so you can do some copy pasting. And then please do note this session is being recorded, and we're going to make it available in case you'd like to share it with colleagues. And be on the lookout for some emails in the coming days, one with a certificate of attendance and then another with a link to the recording. Both emails will include information on how you can connect with us about Intellispark Pro and ScholarCentric for your school or district. So sorry for the long intro, but now I am happy to introduce Dr. Scott Solberg. And Scott, welcome.
Yeah,
Good
thank you.
afternoon. I'm going to kick us off with the first question. And since this discussion on resiliency may be new to some of you, we're going to start out with just some fundamentals of resiliency. So Scott, can you share how you define resiliency and why it's so important to students' fundamental academic success and long-term outcomes?
Sure. Yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you. And hopefully please use the chat and Q&A button so we can respond as you have questions or comments on some of the things we're talking about. I know it's hard to have it as a conversation with everyone, but I think if we can be responsive to you, it will help a lot. So resiliency is really an interesting concept in the sense that we're talking about social emotional learning skills. So it's still within that larger SEL framework. But these are also skills that when an individual experiences a stress, a life change, trauma, in our research, it was asking students about their exposure to violence. We were working in inner city Milwaukee, and a lot of these youth turned out had been exposed to a lot of challenging situations. The question is, what are the qualities of these SEL that need to activate during those periods that are going to help support them to maintain their concentration academically, keep a focus on the long-term goals, keep away from depression and anxiety, and kind of manage through. And so in our research, this is exactly what we found. It comes from Ann Maston's concept of resiliency, that you have to have a stressor for these other elements to kick in. And what we found was that when students had high academic self-efficacy, when they felt confident to be able to also manage their stress already, they had stress management skills, when they were found school relevant, meaningful, what we call intrinsic motivation, when they had good peer, family, and connections with educators, when those connections were in place and they had a sense of future purpose, so valuing education, but also their later post-secondary, that when those events occurred, they were still doing quite well academically, and in fact, in our group, they were really flourishing. And the individuals who didn't have those skills, when they were experiencing when their exposure to violence was higher, it just fell. You could just see everything fell down. They just were not performing well academically. They weren't as engaged as well. So this is kind of how we're thinking resilience. We have a lot of youth around this country. And that, and they've been stressed, and we know COVID was one of these major traumatizing, even though we're still not through the trauma yet, and we're going to have to really get through emotionally through this period. There's youth that are doing okay, and there's youth that are really getting taken out. And so we want to be thinking about resiliency skills because they're malleable. These are things we can do in a classroom setting. So when we were originally in the design of the theory, we were looking for what is it that an educator can do to try to support youth right now as they walk in the building. I can't control what happens outside the building. I can't control the home life, but I can do things within the school that can really benefit youth and help them really become more competent as learners.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Solberg, is it safe to say that we can't assume that students, given their background, will or will not have certain resiliency traits, right? Like it could be a student from a certain background that we might assume is low in resiliency, but we can't assume, right? It's really, we need to assess it.
Yeah, and we won't use the word traits because these are malleable. So these are things that everyone can develop. They're not inborn in that sense. Mm-hmm. I think the key issue is that just ask yourself, and you can ask yourself in the room, right? When you try to say I have stress, right? Well, how do you know whether your stress is bigger or less than anyone else, right? How can you know that? How can you know whether your health issues are similar or not similar? Things like that, your confidence levels. Mm-hmm. It's not until we get data that we can actually look at that. And as educators, I've had students that are great at looking good. They can sit in that classroom quietly and everything looks fine. And then when you look at for example, in one case, it was a young woman, I looked at her health and well-being indicators and I went, oh my. And all I did was say, it looks like you might want to talk with someone. And she goes, yeah, I think so. She had no clue that her sleeping imbalance and eating and her agitation, that this was not the same as everyone else, right?
Mhm.
So these are hard both as an individual to gauge, but as educators, how can we gauge that, right? And so yeah, this is really important information, and we've had so many times from you all through the time we've been doing this, where principals call up and complain that the assessment found their best student, and when I say best student, it was valedictorian on more than one occasion, is being said that they've got issues. And all we would say is go talk to them, and then they would find out the student's homeless. They would find out the student had been hospitalized recently. There had been a major life change going on. So these are things that we're not going to know about our youth unless we do some kind of more formalized assessment around what's happening. So I do think it's invaluable, and I think we have to also participate in that. We have to also be looking at ourselves. We're all going through the COVID together. This is something that's a global crisis that we're all experiencing. So we got to be checking our own health and well-being and our own motivation and purpose, as you know, just to kind of find a way to help us manage through these challenging situations. And so we have to start leaning on our own support networks and be really looking at our health and well-being as well as we manage through. So this is a lifelong process. It's a skill that we're working with youth to learn, but it's the same set of skills we need as adults as well. So.
Well, and that leads me to you, Dr. Solberg. So what led you to focus on this as something that to resiliency in your research?
All right, so maybe some of you've heard the story. I do tell it a lot, and I don't know if I've talked about it with this audience or not. If some of you are seeing this for another, we're on our Zoom call either last year or maybe some other ones I've done. But yeah, let me tell you how I got into this whole profession, and it's a rather funny story. So you're allowed to laugh. I know I can't hear it, but I'm going to assume it's happening because it is a pretty funny story, I think. So at any rate, when I was 17, senior in high school, I was young. And my mom was worried about what my career path was going to be. And she should have been worried because all I ever did was play soccer. And I did show up to school. I will say I was in the class, but I'm not sure I was an active or engaged learner that we would like to see in today's youth. So I will say I wasn't great. Had a lot to learn when I got out of high school. But I was all about soccer, and in California, you could play year round. So we were constantly in leagues going all the time from middle school all the way through high school. So, and this is part of what one does in California. If you're from California, you'll resonate to this. But anyway, she went to her psychic to say, I'm concerned about my son and I need to know what he should be. And so she came home that night after meeting with her psychic and said, the psychic and I were talking, and we've decided that you should become a psychiatrist. Now, the challenge is that at the moment I was presented with this occupation, I immediately, and this is why I do this work, I immediately said, I can't, right? And the reason I said I couldn't, I didn't know much about psychiatry, but I knew chemistry would be involved, right? Because I knew there was a medical degree somewhere and all that. Now, I loved chemistry growing up. I had a chemistry set. I even burned the whole test tubes. I don't know what I mixed, but something bad happened. I mean, I was all into playing with the chemistry stuff. I loved it. And when I got into my sophomore chemistry class, it was fantastic. And I'm learning, and we were Bunsen burners and all this stuff going on. There was a small challenge, and that was that our chemistry teacher, well, he was always drunk in class. True story. I know. Can you believe it? So, and it's a little scary because you could smell the breath from a couple of rows. And so the Bunsen burners, you're always kind of moving it. You didn't want a flame going off there. But anyway, it was really bad. But he was a really good teacher, and he was exciting, and he was engaged, and he was really encouraging. And I was loving it. And I don't know, I probably was not doing well in class, but I'm going to pretend I was getting a B. Let's just say I was passing. And it was going really well. And then the holiday break occurs, and in walks Mrs. Dorman. I don't know, I can remember her name. It's etched as one of those imprinted events in my history. She must have been 800 years old. She always stared at the chalkboard, and all I heard through the whole semester was wah, 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 wah. Nothing connected. I was just totally lost. By the, halfway through, I'm in the back row, just not even paying attention. And so I came out of that class convinced that I could not do chemistry. Right? But what was the change? The change was the classroom context, right? Now, I know now, and I would certainly be telling my students and certainly my own children, get a different teacher, find a different class, do something different. But I didn't have those resources at the time. I just decided and just made the conclusion that I was unable to do this. So when the time came then to be confronted with this occupational opportunity, and this is what happens, and we've got great research supporting it, we look at the things we feel confident in doing, and if they don't match with the skills and the activities involved in that occupation, we're going to step up. And more importantly, it really is about us as educators to design that environment in a way that is building that self-efficacy, helping our individuals, our youth become confident learners, right? So honestly, I told her, I said, you know what? I can't do chemistry. I can't do psychiatry. Why don't you ask her about psychology? She called the woman up and she said that would be fine. So here I am. Voila. So if this whole career development work I do and career counseling and stuff doesn't work out, we've got the psychic hotline that we can use and certainly give us some advice. But yeah, but that was how I got into this whole thing. But that issue for me has been really a key element, right? Is helping youth leave high school feeling confident about the things they can do well, because it's going to help them lean in. And we start using words like becoming proactive. We start using words self-determination if we're working with youth with disabilities, especially if we're working with youth of color, that sense of I belong. There's certain elements of what this confident individual would be, how they'll be facing the challenges in their future. And that's really the power that I think we have as educators.
And where that element, that aspect of confidence is just one of the key elements in this resilience piece, but it just goes to bear, if our students have confidence that buoyancy isn't there. So thank you for sharing that story. Something to always think about now, and we know Scott is doing this work where it started. So Scott, we've heard you refer to measures of resiliency as an early warning indicator. Within ScholarCentric, we have this academic risk index, this ARI score.
Yeah.
What does this mean, and how should schools think about these measures of resiliency alongside traditional early warning measures that they think of, like attendance, behavior, and grades? What does an ARI mean in ScholarCentric and an early warning indicator?
Sure. So let's get to the ARI in just a moment, the academic risk indicator. So the first is that when we talk about early, what does that mean? So the early warning indicators, as you know, attendance patterns, course performance, right? Behavior challenges, so any kind of behavior reports that come up, getting suspended, all those things, those become really important indicators of future failure. What we're arguing is that those are somewhat lagging, that when those things start showing up, it's because there's been some things happening already. And what are those things? And that's the challenge, right? Person's not showing up to class. We don't know why. We don't know what's happening. So we can call it an early warning, but we're also talking about more concrete, or what I call actionable assessment tools, right? Tools that tell us something we can do to try to support the youth that we're serving. And so since if it comes out that they have low self-efficacy academically, or maybe they're just not feeling connected with their peers, that kind of leads us to what we need to be doing to try to support this individual, right? It's giving us a prescriptive understanding of what these challenges might be. So by early warning, what we found in our longitudinal research is that as they're leaving middle school, if they're coming out with feeling low in these areas, those become predictors of their future ABC analysis. They are going to eventually stop attending or attend more less regularly. Their grade performance is going to go down to the point they're going to have more failing grades. They may have, in our case, we saw as well, more behavior incident reports and things like that. So when you think about what we need to know to be able to anticipate or begin to prevent this from happening, we need good information that, again, is actionable, things that we can build into, whether it's a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3. I like the tier 1 level that all students need it, because you never know when they're going to get at risk. You don't know what, especially when we're talking about low-income populations, stuff is happening all the time, right? That's part of the issue of living in low-income background, or being in low-income background, is you're much more likely to have crises and risks. And so we want to do tier 1 work to help continuously build on these resiliency skills. But the reality is they are very predictive. But now this academic risk indicator is a separate piece. So each of these areas, your valuing education, has 2 subscales. It has, what do you think about school, and what do you think about post-secondary education, right? Well, that post-secondary subfactor turns out to be very predictive of whether students will later become more at risk for school failure. Confidence, right? And one of the confidence areas, we have academic, we have social, we have test taking. There's a lot of things in this that one of those subscales is actually more predictive of whether or not they're going to become at risk again for leaving school or dropping out. And what we found is that there is this set of subscales that are across all of our dimensions, including stress, health, motivation, social connections, all of those, that we picked those out, added them together, and the more severe they were, the better and more stronger the prediction was that they would become at risk for later school failure. And we got up to like an 85% prediction rate. So that's one of our big important pieces that we have to be looking at. Those individuals need right away our tier 3 supports, right? They need someone to talk with. We need to start thinking about what kind of personalized supports and interventions they might need. So while they also need tier 1 and they may need some small group, they really also need someone to get to them right away so we can begin thinking about what might be happening. Because that to me is kind of like that's a big warning sign. And if you're in schools where you have severe challenges going on, unfortunately, you may have a lot of students for whom this is the case. So we've got to get to our out of school, our youth serving organizations that want to be working with us and have funding to support youth. How do we connect them to this process so they become part of that tier 3 level of supports and services? So no, we can't do this all alone. We have to be thinking larger as a community-based work. I know in Milwaukee, it was really interesting, but it was our faith organizations that were there coming to lunches, and they were the only ones that showed up when there were school shootings. And so we were not going to turn them away. It was all we had. We didn't have 25 school counselors coming in like we hear about today. We were all alone. And so there are groups that are going to come up and are going to really want to be working with our youth when they know there's the need. So definitely don't feel like if you get a report like this and there's 30 kids on there that you've got to do it all by yourself. It's how do we bring in a community and work with our school leadership to help us find the resources that'll help us. And if we're in a rural setting, we've got the whole telehealth going right now, which is fantastic. So we know we can do some of this now in a more virtual space.
Well, and I certainly, as I'm working with schools around the country, I know there's been a lot of turnover, and many schools are without some of their, those key people who are used to supporting schools in the tier 2 and tier 3 levels of need. And but that said, I know that there are a lot of people who've joined the call today who are interested in knowing what can they do in their classrooms, what can they do if indeed, as you say, resiliency is not a trait, but it is something that is malleable. What are some of those practical strategies that they can bring into their classrooms today if they don't have some of those experts who can go to tier 2 and tier 3? Is this a class that is taught? Is it strategies that we weave into our core subjects that I could have woven into my English classes when I saw kids every day of the week for the whole school year? I think this is what people are really excited to hear from you today. What are some of these practical strategies that people can into the classroom?
Yeah, no, that's great. And we have a lot. What I also want to do is also just open up, and if you have some that you're using in your classrooms right now, or if there's some strategies that you felt have been really effective, put those down in the chat. We'd love to hear from you in terms of what some of the things that you're doing, because I know we're all in this together. So what we've been trying to do in my work here at the Boston University Center for Future Readiness is we're trying to gather, develop open access lessons that you can use. Hold on a second, apologize. Oh, there we go. Get to these open access lessons that we can use. So I think we have one really good one that I'd love for you to start. We have a bunch, but here's one I think was optimizing your learning. Was that one we were going to show? And if you want to put that up, Patricia, we can just talk about it. But basically what the optimizing your learning does is it helps you start to investigate what is it they're needing personally to be able to focus on learning, right? And kind of keeping in that general way. Now, we know that some of that's going to include or involve some of the emotional mental health, but some of it could also be social. It could be managing time better. It could be needing to learn the academic material and having better access to, supports for that kind of thing. So the idea is that we're helping them explore for themselves what the challenges that there might be, and then consider all of these different elements of activities they might try connecting with. And what they start to learn in this is that going to talk to your school counselor, taking some time to figure out future plans or connecting with your peers and other things that are happening, they actually address a lot of different issues, right? It's like, this is how we manage through life situations. And so they start to learn that the same solution can help address many different challenges that they might have. One of the big ones that's in there is eating, right? Because we know their blood sugar, and we know that if they're just going to be eating carbohydrates, they're going to bottom out. So helping them think about how they're getting access to the kind of foods that are going to be supportive, support them best as they're managing through as well. Getting good sleep is another big one that comes up for our youth. I mean, how many of them say, "Oh, I stay up till whatever," and then they're supposed to get up early to get to school, and they get to school and they're just sleeping, or they're not able to focus. So helping them really see the connection of all these is what this optimizing your learning lesson's all about. And what you have there is done in a PowerPoint. Now that we're back in person, it can be done. The PowerPoint can be a facilitating guide, but it was kind of fun to be able to use some of these Nearpod and other kinds of things to do surveys, so students could realize they weren't alone, right? You could still do that probably if they're allowed to have their phones in class. They can actually sit and you can do some surveys of them to see who has what kind of issues and how many might have that. So definitely think about how you might use a lesson like this to help really jumpstart focus, mental health, well-being is a centerpiece as they start transitioning back into school. And it obviously hits all the issues that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm. And we also have Talon Mahaffey from St. Rita's School has posted another example, growth mindset with freshmen in high school.
Yeah,
that one
fantastic. And I think the growth mindset work is so critical because, as you heard, we want youth to focus on change and development, and they have to understand that it's not about being good at chemistry. It's learning how to learn chemistry. It's not about being good at math. It's not an inborn good at math. There are some out there that are amazing, and yes, they get it quickly, but not the majority. The majority have to work really hard to understand this work, right? And that's what we have to explain to them. Everyone has had to learn how to do this, right? I mean, I'm amazed at how many of our women researchers in my profession of counseling psychology started their doctoral training by saying they don't ever want to take statistics. And now they're some of the leading researchers using very complex statistics, right? So it is about learning how to learn. And I think the growth mindset movement is something that we need to be starting early, and it needs to be all throughout the lifespan, because we have to have our parents have to recognize too, it's not too late to learn how to learn, right? So, and there is a lifelong learning continuum. If you're going to be living to 100 years old, you've got a lot of learning to do throughout your lifespan, right? So growth mindset is a really great, exciting thing to be focused on. Thanks, Talon.
Scott, you've also mentioned, some of these strategies, they may be classroom activities specifically, but it can also be something that is approached across the school community. Like there might be a theme across the school for a week or a given month. Can you share some examples about that? And who leads that? Is it a counselor? Is it the assistant principal? How does that work?
Yeah. Let me get to that in 1 second.
Oh, sure.
So the link that you received is a link to an open access set of resources of activities. So certainly you can choose those. I really love the Who Am I activity as a way of helping think through future goals and exploration and things like that. So, so definitely you can use those. You can modify them. If you do some great work and you're excited, I would love for you to send it back. Tell us what you did and how you did it. It's really kind of fun to see how other educators really take this on. So definitely those are open for you to work with. I found what was really exciting when we first started doing this work was how schools would start to push in the themes of these resiliency skills at lunch, right? So that lunchtime there would be there would be posters up, or there would be themes, there would be conversations, resources and such. So they would like each month be focused on one of these different resiliency skills. And I thought that was really creative and unique. And there's ways that students can take a lead role in it too, right? Because they can start thinking about, they can become ambassadors for thinking through how they might be able to communicate with others the value of this, or get in and get some tips and ideas for stress management or mindfulness you talked about. It could also be things like good diet tips, things like that. And there could also just be, there could be ways that we're going to have great food. We're going to have fruit and vegetables and have somebody in time. There's just things we can do that make this more dimensional, multi-dimensional as an activity. It's not just a sitting and talking about in a classroom. Now it's happening at lunch. We see things in the hallways. Maybe we have some speakers coming in, talks happening, connections like that. So there's a lot of things we can do, I think, to really bring this out in creative ways and not make it a didactic, always be a didactic kind of an experience. And again, if there's anyone who has some ideas of how you might be doing some of these things naturally already, we'd love to hear, because it is, the more creativity we can bring to this, I think the better.
And Scott, when it comes to, a school has the results of how their students are doing. Is this more of a team-oriented approach, that there is a subset of people, or is it across faculty? Look, we all need to sit down and own this. What have you seen as the most effective way, and the most realistic and most effective way?
Yeah.
Have kind of taken what they've learned and moved forward.
Yeah, I think that where we've seen the most intensive action planning around the data is when a team of educators, they're kind of a response team, and they get together to figure out who are the students that we need to, who have the high academic risk indicator that we need to get immediate attention to in a given school. What are some of the areas? Maybe it's relationships with teachers, for example, that seem to be lower than the other schools in the district. So they can start brainstorming as a community about ways they might respond to things like that, right? And ways to get back to teachers some information that they might find important around their students and what's happening. So there does need to be kind of a teaming effort around that, I think, is stronger. Otherwise, you end up feeling very isolated. You have information, but it's just me, it's all I have. So there is a team. It's usually going to be a school counselor, social worker level type thing, maybe an assistant principal that would be involved in that, because there's going to be some confidentiality perhaps that you're going to want to, as you're talking about the issues and things, that you're going to want to maintain. But there does need to be then the action plan, and that should be involving other educators. Maybe there's a certain activity going on that you want to make sure this individual has access to. Maybe it's as we talked about tier 3, maybe there's some community organizations or other supports you want to certainly invite the family to take advantage of. So there does need to be coordination across the school. And then it really can become all educators supporting these conversations. And I know there's ways that we've seen the math teachers getting excited about this, because the more they learn about the students and have these conversations, they can see the students now becoming more invested in the math classes or the English language arts. So I do believe that the relational dynamic that occurs through what we have as a ScholarCentric set of lessons, we just gave you these other 3 lessons, but anything that's engaging a dialogue where the educator is able to become this caring, encouraging adult that's really, and sharing their own, kind of in an appropriate way, but their own kind of experience and dealing with their own optimizing, in this case, their ability to be ready to be a teacher, right? How am I optimizing? What am I doing? And thinking about that bridges across the youth, and it really gets them connected in a way that the last thing in the world they ever want to do is disappoint that teacher. And so the leverage they realize they gain through this process of conversation at the tier 1 level is amazing. And so those youth that we're concerned about, when they're immersed within that kind of environment, not only are they getting those connections with their teachers, but they're also building those same relational connections with their peers. And that's the kind of glue, if you will, that keeps students invested in learning and invested in believing that they've got some reason for being in school. So really powerful stuff that can happen if we can move to that next level. So what the data does is it just gives us an impetus. It gives us the reason why. It gives us the sense of urgency that we really need to get moving in this direction. And the actual implementation and intervention, we want to do as much as we can to try to engage our other educators and naturally have it as part of the normal day-to-day kinds of activities as we push it through.
So I think what you were getting at there, Scott, I know one of the questions that I had for you is around, how do you advise an educator who's getting pushback, that they can't carve out time to focus on resiliency? How do you get teachers to appreciate the impact of this? And it sounds you're starting to get at that is, there are returns.
Yeah.
Returns for this focus.
Yeah, so we got a few ways we want to address this. It's a really important issue. The first one is, who knew, and you know the answer to this, right? That when you have a student who's engaged and wanting to learn, they learn faster and they learn more. That's all we're working on here. We're trying to facilitate a way to enable all of our youth to be focused on learning and wanting to learn the material because they see it's relevant and meaningful. That's the whole ballgame. And we know from our research that these activities we're talking about and these conversations actually do that. So that's part of the issue for the classroom teachers. They need to know that we're doing this to help support them in building a ready to learn classroom, if you will. It's one of the phrases we used years ago. And I still think it's true. I think it's a really important one. Another way, now you're the school counselor and you're trying to get time to do these activities and you're getting some pushback. There's some interesting ways I think we can work with educators. And I have two resources that I want you to look at. The first one comes from our colleagues in Kansas. They're doing some really amazing work, really fabulous. And this one resource that we're pointing you to, they call it employability skills. Don't worry about that. These are the durable skills, right? We're not going to call them soft skills, right? This is the last time we use that word. It's a bad word. We don't like using it. We don't want to use non-cognitive, right? We don't want to use all. These are what the career tech industry is now using is durable. These are the skills that technology can't replace, right? Leadership, initiative, getting along with others, being able to be in a group setting, and every time you're there, the group really gets along well and it moves. And I was a preschool teacher, so I know when certain kids weren't in the classroom, boy, was it a long day. And that year I had the 5 girls who decided they were all going to be queens. Oh my goodness, we could not get anyone to step down off of that. It was a battle all year long. So we know that there are some dynamics within classrooms that work really well when certain youth have these certain qualities, right? What Kansas is giving us is a way to talk about that as durable skills that have a connection to their future readiness for the world of work. It's going to make them better at college if that's where their plans are. It's going to make them better as employees. These are the skills employers are looking for. And what I'm suggesting is, rather than you saying, oh, I've got to do this independent of anything else, when your school is doing project-based learning, you can now use this little worksheet. It's got a beautiful rubric and it's got a really nice little chart to have the students identify which of the skills on this list are they wanting to work on, right? What do they want to learn? So get them invested in these durable skills and their value. They're about to go into a work-based learning or a project-based learning activity. And now when they're in that activity, they can realize what they might be doing in that activity to demonstrate or build and take some risks even in developing some of these skills. And then you're there to help verify and help them write about, if they do a little portfolio piece, they can reflect on what they've learned about themselves in that. We could do the same thing for my favorite activity is civic engagement, right? Where they're identifying a problem in the community, They're learning how to address it. Sometimes they're actually able to do some fundraising to get the money to do something, and they come off with these great, just amazing things. In the work I do here in Boston, our middle school youth did a whole public service announcement where they designed the script, they did the graphics, they did the music, they actually wrote and performed the music, they did the voiceovers, and produced a public service announcement encouraging their Latinx families to get the COVID vaccine. Phenomenal, phenomenal. The skills they learned, and seeing this one individual who was very cautious and wouldn't talk in public, just didn't have that sense of confidence, just bloomed. And all of a sudden was ready to talk about her skills and talent. Never realized the value of her artistic quality stuff. Amazing. So this is the kind of stuff where we don't have to be necessarily designing and doing the heavy lifting on some of their academics, but we have the vision and understanding that these same academic activities can also relate to the kinds of durable human skills that are going to support them in the world of work. And the third level there is CASEL. We helped put together with my colleagues from the Coalition for Career Development Center and Civic and CASEL. We rolled up our sleeves and wrote a big crosswalk between the social emotional learning skills that educators are already buying into, right? And if you're in a state that doesn't like the term, don't use the term. Call it mental health. Call it durable skills, right? This is what they are. So don't worry about the label. But the cross section between those skills and the world of work and the readiness for the world of work was something that we put together. It's a great national now. It's out. We have some case studies with a few states to go with it as well. But it's just a nice policy framework that we're really proud of. That's another way of helping educators see that all we're doing is taking what you're already doing and showing you that it actually is the foundation, not only for building a better classroom, for which we have great meta-analyses saying, yep, start in elementary, they do better in the classroom. Now we know we have other meta-analyses, better mental health. So we know that these same skills help an individual regulate, help them have positive relationships and things needed for positive mental health. And third step, it's the readiness. These are the durable skills that are going to make you more, you're going to be more successful in higher education and your post-school, but especially when it's time to get into the world of work. These are the skills your employers are going to be looking for. So it's just helping us see that we're not asking to do something that's out of their norm. We're asking just to be part of that process and help really focus it in a way that students can be aware of the talent they're developing. And then as we're doing our career development activities, we can help them see the transferability of those skills into the many occupations that they align with.
Mm-hmm. And Scott, I love how you pull this together, because I know you're working very closely with many states on their, ILP planning and process. And this just really nicely ties in how critical resiliency is in, looking at the long term and looking at a plan that is very holistic. You had also mentioned, that sometimes if you're an administrator who is looking at how to establish buy-in for a resiliency program and to help people understand how this all is tied together, there were additional resources that you wanted to share around, how to help them measure success with implementing a program like this over time. So I'm going to put that in the chat box as well, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, so what you're getting now is a deluge, and I apologize if it causes anxiety. I had a hard time trying to track down all my materials all the time, and people would ask me for a presentation or resources. So I just created an open Google Drive that you're able to go in and take what you'd like. So you should be able to go in and download anything there that you find important. There's a lot of resources there. Now I apologize if some of the links don't work because it's been up for a while. But for the most part, you should have some things loaded in for those. We have a how-to guide, or if you are interested in ILPs, which we call now personalized career and academic plans. And I know your states all have different naming conventions. So whatever your state calls it, that's what it is. And then we have a how-to guide to really help you see other resources that connect up. These free resources that I gave you earlier in the session is designed, you saw the word MyCap listed probably, and that's My Career and Academic Plan. That's what we call it in Massachusetts, which is our naming convention. But we're just trying to provide a way, especially during COVID, to try to help create more dynamic emotional lessons that can help keep youth, focused on learning. So you have everything there. I try really hard to give away everything we do. That way, because I know you need it and we don't need to be paying for everything. And also to connect you, this Coalition for Career Development Center, we're also kind of being a clearinghouse to also continue to push out things that are coming up in this space that people can gain access to. Like you just saw the work from Kansas and the work from CASA, examples of areas that we're really excited about.
Thank you, Scott, for sharing all this, because I do know that, we learn as educators that there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. So let's build on the shoulders of giants before us. Speaking of which, I wanted to comment, Christy Richardson did put in the Q&A, she loves teaching students about mood meters, giving them the power to own the space and feelings that they are having empowers them. And again, I love this because it also builds on this confidence piece. It builds on this connectedness piece, and start with the student. It doesn't need to be coming from the outside all the time. It can be helping the student to exercise their voice.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point. And that's why the personalized career and academic plans, the whole focus is, let's get the information to the students so they can become more proactive and motivated to do their own work, right? To do their own learning, to do their own identifying of pathways. We call it career navigation skills. But we really, it's not about us being experts anymore. It's not about us having the right answers. It's about how do we empower youth with their understanding of themselves and how this whole thing works so they can make good decisions about their learning opportunities and really understand why they need to invest in the opportunities they have.
So Scott, I know you originally obviously created the ScholarCentric program and been used all over the country. Now it's embedded in Intellispark Pro. How do you explain, the value or how that will change or enhance the experience of this program? Yeah,
no, that's a really good point. I think I'm a huge fan of career tech. That's a new fancy word, right? Call it career tech. And it's important because as educators, we don't have the time to follow every student. We can't see them every day. We can't connect with them. So we need technologies that will help us interact and get information in a way that's timely and responsive. What I'm most excited about in this whole intersection is the ScholarCentric assessment you can think of as your summative assessment. It can be the summative assessment of what do we got starting the year with, and then at the end of the year, how are we ending and what do we need to get ready for the next year, right? So it's sort of a, you're not doing it every day. You're doing it once in a while. And when we first established it, everyone came back saying, oh, but we need to have some little push-in times where we can check in. And on a more formative assessment, how is this going? They said they had issues with social support systems. Do they still? Are we seeing progress, right? And we really didn't have the flexibility with such a large instrument to just simply create these little tiny ones. And that's what Intellispark has. It has ready to go and it aligns beautifully. And we didn't plan it that way, by the way. We just came together and realized, oh my gosh, we have the same language. We're talking the same thing. But this idea that Intellispark has brought out these very formative, quick push-in kinds of surveys as a gauge to see how students are moving along and progressing. Fantastic. Fantastic. And then that's part of a larger system of engagement with youth. Youth are really not interested in sitting down and talking. I don't know if you've got children, but wow, my daughter lived in the cave for all of high school. And if we wanted to get in touch with her, we texted. So, it's just a weird, they're strange in this way. They're used to technology. They're used to texting. They're used to doing all this stuff. So how do we connect with them? Well, they like you connecting through technology. So I think it's a natural opportunity for us to start finding these technologies that can help us have the relational dynamic with the youth. And then, of course, when they need more help or when it's clear they need time one-on-one or in group settings, we can certainly get them to those as well. But I think these are really important tools for us to think about and consider. Because we have a lot of youth to be focused on. And if we're seeing them for one person for a whole hour or 40 minutes or whatever that period is, that's about 20 students that may have needed that help. So how do we help make sure we're maximizing the support systems that we have and the natural resources that we have available to really help all of our youth in an efficient way.
Mhm. And I can certainly see schools doing that, where they are looking to say, all right, this is what we're doing in response to this.
Mhm.
How frequently do we need that resource? What more do we need? Do we have a gap in
Mhm.
how we address? So it kind of clarifies resource usage, but also, roles and responsibilities too. Who's got this? If I don't have
Right,
it, who does have it?
right.
Do we have somebody who can handle this kind of scenario for a student?
Right. And I think, this power of the Intellispark system is that you can assign people to their groups, right? So you can have a homeroom type environment where they're connecting with the youth that are in their group. So it's not like one counselor for 300, 250 kids trying to follow them, the 250. We can break that down into more intimate support systems. So yeah, I think we need all of these things to help out. And then we need the counselor to be there seeing and making sure that everything is functioning well. So it's a team sport, but it's a coordination of that team that I think is really the big issue now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Scott, I'm just going to ask you, you've been focused on resiliency for well over a decade at this point. And certainly we're in an interesting time now. Has anything surprised you of late in
Well,
work?
so it's been a little more than one decade. I would almost put it at three. It was certainly 2 decades ago when we really started studying and working on it. But at the time, no one knew what resiliency meant. It was the first time when we first came out with this, it was really tough to talk. Even we didn't even have social emotional learning wasn't invented as a concept. So it was a really interesting to be telling people, there's this element of academics that's really important. And they're going, no child left behind. We need to be focusing on improving math and language arts and all that. That's what our task is. And so it's really tough to be able to get people to understand what this nature of this was all about. Now we're there. I mean, I really feel like, and I think COVID has also brought it even more, put it in our face even more. But I think we're realizing that we've got really talented youth. They really are talented. They may not have the literacy and the numeracy tools yet to be able to showcase that talent in an academic setting, but you'd be amazed at other settings where they can, right? And we need to basically be finding a way to connect and invest more deeply with our youth so they can see it. We talked about growth mindset as a core component of that to help them see that, yeah, they can develop. I know everyone's in a panic, and that's great. We can be in a panic if you want, that we lost a year or two of learning. Oh my gosh, it's going to take generations. No, I think we can actually get them back in an academic year if they're motivated. If they see the relevance of learning. I have watched all I've worked is with low income youth in very difficult situations. And when they get engaged, I've seen them make up 3 and 4 grade levels in a single semester because they're smart. They've just not been given supports or the sense of purpose that they need in order to really lean into this work. Okay. So I do believe in those youth. I'm going right in with them. And I think when we create a classroom where this is happening, it's infectious and they're going to start moving into this. So for me, the big change is I feel like finally everybody's here. Like when I started using the word self-efficacy, you'll notice on our thing, we call it confidence. That's because nobody knew what self-efficacy was. Well, now everybody knows what it is, right? So now we can use the term again. So it's been an exciting time to see as a culture and as an education system, we're embracing the science of what we're talking about in ways that we've never have. And I'm just hoping we can now invest in the activities, the interventions, the assessment tools and supports needed to really build our capacity as an education system to really support the youth in a way that we really know is possible.
Well, it's a very positive and hopeful view. I love your example of the students that you lean in, and you do. We know these students are smart, and it's about feeling the empowered and confident and motivated.
Yeah.
And so I love that hopeful view. And I want to make sure we've got just a few minutes left before the top of the hour. I haven't seen too many questions, but I just want to make sure that if there are any additional questions, people have feel the opportunity to put those in the chat or in the Q&A.
Yeah. Please.
As we mentioned, there are some links here, and there's a bit to unpack behind those links. You know, even especially the very first one that I put in and sort of moved along. Scott mentioned the optimizing your learning specific lesson, but there are a slew of lessons in there.
Yes,
So
there's a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, any comments or questions as we get to the top of the hour here? Before I have to run out to my green line tea in Boston here to make it home.
Looks like we may have one. How do we engage and include our parents? Are there best practices for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the things we need to do with parents is have an orientation with them about all of these skills. And I love doing that. It's one of my favorite sessions, was to do a parent session where we talk about the instrument, we talk about what's going on, talk about its value, and the parents were like, oh my gosh, I need this. And they do, we all need this, right? It's the same skill sets, period. So, yeah, involving parents early and often in this is really critical. They need to see that we're investing in their child. We're not just investing in them as a learner, we're investing in them as a future and helping them find build the skills needed to be successful in that future. So I really want to say parents should be in there throughout. Parents, especially as you're doing other more formalized programming through the year, as a parent, it's always helpful to know what is going to happen when, not the day before, the week before, but maybe having an orientation, and even to the point of a syllabus parents have requested, right? Can I get an idea of what you'll be doing around these activities through the year? And what we want to do then is encourage parents how they can be part of that process. So I've seen districts on their website, a really good one is in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. If you look at their academic career plan, you'll see here's what we're going to be doing for all of the middle school 8th graders. And for every area, there's a list for what parents can do. So here's some things you might want to do to support us. So I think having a framework where this is a team sport, part of that team is the home and the family, and part of the team is our outside youth serving organizations. When we start really thinking about these as team players, we just want to articulate the ways in which we can support one another going forward. So I think that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And the last question, Scott, do you see value in making a float to be in a parade to show students the skills they already possess?
Wow, that sounds like a ton of fun. I want pictures. I want you to send them to us. I want the video, and we'll put that up on our website. I'm telling Intellispark what they'll do. But yeah, definitely we'll get that up there. That would be absolutely fantastic. You know, anything we can do to help youth make it tangible, everything they're learning, right? And if you really get big on this, they're doing this in Scotland on the career side, but we can do it on the SEL as well, is you get your high school students to go down to the middle and elementary and be the ambassadors, right? They become the resiliency ambassadors. And it's amazing how powerful it is when the older students come in and talk with the younger. I mean, they're glued to it. So yeah, I think the float, the getting out in the community, talking about using it within leadership, all of that stuff becomes really powerful. What we did in our school, some of the high school seniors for their senior, they do a work-based learning project. They took on the assessment and they built their own assessment, and they had the students take it. And then they reported to the school committee one evening, as well as the health committee for the town, about what was going on in the school and making recommendations for next steps. Wow. That's the civic engagement level that I think is awesome. So building a float, absolutely, all over that. Fantastic.
Thank you. Well, we are over the top of the hour. Thank you so much, Scott, for your ideas, your strategies today. Thank you to everyone who joined us in carving this time out in a busy time. And I just wanted to once again remind you to be sure to check your email for a certificate of attendance, a link to the recording, and information if you would like about Intellispark Pro and ScholarCentric and how to connect with us about that. Please do visit intellispark.com and you can learn more. We have a lot more resources about what we do, and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay informed about future events that we'll be having. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and safe travels if you're heading to the city or anywhere else.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much.